Hi there, this is Carl Irwin. This is not a tutorial. This is actually just a follow-up video for a feature request. I have submitted a feature request on the LMMS GitHub platform, and I just wanted to give a follow-up video to explain what it is that I'm requesting. Oftentimes when requests are made, particularly for LMMS, it probably has to do with the limited resources that we have for development. There's few people working on the program. And also the very, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, just the way it is. Those people that are working on the program have a very narrow view of what they mean to accomplish with the program. So as a request is made, oftentimes a request will be ignored because the developers have no interest in the request. They don't see the potential for the request itself, and the requests will just be put off, or they'll be closed because that doesn't fit the vision of the developers. And there's some sense in which that's fine. There is going to be some very obscure requests that are made for any open source software, and developers are not going to be likely to try to hammer out a solution for an obscure request that doesn't seem to have a following. However, I do want to suggest that there may be certain features that are requested in any open source software platform that fall under a category of unknown unknowns. We'll call it that, to steal a phrase from Donald Rumsfeld, who's a former political figure in the United States. He once talked about intelligence gathering, and he talked about what are called known knowns, unknown unknowns, and known unknowns. And what that refers to is there are the things that you know. That's the stuff that you know. There are the things that you know that you don't know, meaning that there are some things that you know exist, and you know that you are unfamiliar with them, and you know that you don't know them. You're not up on that particular piece of information, but you know that it is there. And then there's the unknown unknowns. The unknown unknowns. And that is that you don't know something because you straight up don't even know that it exists. You don't know of the potential, so therefore you don't know that it exists, and it remains not merely unknown to you, it remains completely hidden from your view. You don't even know that the possibility is there. So as a developer, if you're a developer working on LMMS, and I hope that you see this, I want to suggest to you there may be an unknown unknown here, a pretty simple request that I'm making. Now, that doesn't mean that it's simple to solve. I'm ignorant on this. I'm talking, quite frankly, about an unknown unknown myself. I don't really know how to solve this. I'm not a developer. I don't code. But I will say that what I'm requesting does not require any sort of change in the GUI. It does not require the addition or subtraction of any buttons or any sorts of switches or any sorts of changes to the underlying settings of LMMS. It doesn't really require anything visual. What I'm asking for is really a back-end socket. That is a MIDI back-end socket such that when LMMS is running, it is sending a MIDI output for its time code. Okay? This is not about integration with Jack. This is not about integration with anything. This is not about adding an input. This is not about creating an input such that information can come into LMMS and be translated and put to use. We're talking about taking information that exists in the program already, is already accounted for in the way that the program works, and somehow routing that to an output socket so that other programs can be aware of that data that LMMS is sending. We already have this in the form of MIDI event output. That is to say that LMMS can send out MIDI events like notes from a particular instrument in the either in the beat baseline editor or in the song editor, and you can assign a MIDI out to a MIDI input device or an output device, like a keyboard, a synthesizer, or some other piece of software that can be run based on MIDI events coming out to it. What I'm talking about is doing the exact same thing, but just for the MIDI time code. And let me show you what I mean. So we'll open up LMMS. This is release candidate 7. I know that release candidate 8 is now out. I didn't download that yet. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which version we're looking at. I can illustrate what's going on here pretty plainly. For example, if I turn on a MIDI input device here, turn on my keyboard, and we look at the triple oscillator by default, there's a MIDI input and an output. And this is what exists in the GUI already. Again, we're not talking about changing the GUI. This is just where we account for some MIDI events here. You can see that I have an input device, USB Uno MIDI interface. This is to my keyboard. So this would be the input slot for my keyboard to play back events, and I can turn that on or off. Now, I don't actually need to do that here, I don't think, and I'll show you what I mean in a moment. Likewise, if we look in the MIDI output, I have a MIDI through, and then I have also an output to that same MIDI device. Now, what I want to do here is I'm going to start up my ALSA connection kit here. This is in Linux, Lubuntu. This is my ALSA sequencer, the connection kit, and you'll see what it's showing in the sound card, or rather the ALSA sound software running the system, that I have some things showing up here. I have my MIDI through, and I have my MIDI keyboard device here as well. Okay, let me check my settings just to see what I have last put on here. So this is set up for ALSA sequencer. Now, if I come up here and no, that's fine. If I come up here and I select my MIDI output or my input and I select the keyboard, you see what's going on there. Now, I want to start up something else. This is another application. This is why I would use it, but there's other reasons why you would want to have timecode out. Again, just routing the information that already exists, and I'll show you what that is in a moment, routing that out to here. I need to find my video player, so this is XJADEO. I'm not sure how you say it, but XJADEO. It's a video player. This is about this. The name is about its ability to interface with Jack, but we're not dealing with Jack. I'm just dealing with ALSA right now. If you look in the settings here, there is some sync settings for Jack, Linux. I think that's LTC Linux timecode. I'm not really sure. MIDI timecode Jack, MIDI timecode port MIDI, MIDI timecode ALSA sequencer, MIDI timecode ALSA raw. If I select the ALSA sequencer and I go to my ALSA sequencer, you'll see what shows up here. I can see my video player with MIDI timecode in. I can even take a MIDI event from, let's say, from LMMS and connect it to that. In fact, if you look up here under triple oscillator, under output, you can see that my video player shows up. It already routes to that. But what this is routing is a MIDI event, not the timecode. Now, here is where we account for timecode. There's two places that we account for timecode in the LMMS GUI. Right here is our MIDI timecode, because it gives us minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. And then on the timeline, this is also the MIDI timecode. So when we put an event in here, this is the log of time that demonstrates where events are happening. This is the time in real time when we hit play. You can see that the time is going by. What we want to do is take the time code that's represented here and route that out to an open socket that is always on. You don't even have to put an option to turn it on. In fact, the option to turn it on could merely just be the MIDI interface, ALSA sequencer, and that's where it would exist under the Advanced Linux sound architecture. Okay, so coming through the MIDI sequencer there, the ALSA sequencer. So not the raw MIDI, but the ALSA sequencer. If that socket existed such that when we opened up a plugin like JDO, we would see in the ALSA sequencer LMMS MTC out right here. It would just show up all the time whenever we make that selection. So I'm not asking for a change in the GUI. I'm not asking for a bunch of code to be rewritten. I'm just asking for access to information that is already present as an output. So when we're outputting this data right here to this place in the GUI, can we create an output that also goes to a MIDI socket in the ALSA sequencer layer? So that way I could select on the video player MTC ALSA sequencer, and then I could select the place where that is at in the sequencer on LMMS out and plug it into MTC in. You can see that it lets me do that here with MIDI events. Now this doesn't mean anything because this is looking for time code. Okay, if I had a third-party application that ran audio and used MIDI input events, I could route that to that device, and LMMS would be able to sort of slave it in a way that it would play those events. Now, it would not sync the time code, but it would play the events in real time with the time code. I want access to the time code out coming down here so that I can use the time code to sync other applications that are time code aware. Now, why is this important? So again, this is one of those unknown unknowns. You may not be aware that it is a desire for some composers to be able to sync their audio to picture. We are not talking about making a layer that renders video. We are not talking about putting on a video editor into LMMS. We are not talking about sequencing audio and video together and creating an output file with both of those things on there. We are talking about the ability to play video in sync with LMMS. This is a completely normal option on digital audio workstations. This is something that is very common, very useful, because it allows a film composer, someone who is composing music for film, to ensure that their tracks are properly synced with the video when they output their track. So then I can output my wave track or my whatever output format I want to use, and then I know that I can just drop that into a video editor and it will sync appropriately with my video. The purpose for this is so that you can do what we call two things. I can see in real time inside of my LMMS project that my music is syncing properly. So I can move MIDI events or audio events into places where they actuate with hits. They actually line up with things that are happening in the video accurately. Also, I can use this type of capability so that whenever I hit record, I would be able to play to the picture. I can play in my MIDI device in live, in my MIDI keyboard, and I can play music as if I'm syncing it with the video that I'm watching there. Much like you would do in a soundstage with an orchestra, I would be able to do that from this environment. You see, LMMS is not merely a beat maker. It is not merely an electronic dance music machine. It is not merely those things. It is a fully fledged MIDI sequencer. And I can use sound fonts, and I can use some VSTs, and I can use all kinds of other Rompler type samplers and create orchestral music and actually do a pretty good job at it. I want to be able to do that to picture with this capability, and we would open up the possibilities for LMMS quite a bit more if we had just this MIDI timecode output. So I know people have asked for jack transport in the past. That's not what I'm asking for. Although I will tell you, if you have a MIDI timecode output, you are pretty much halfway there, because you could use that MIDI timecode out socket 2 slave elements that would also potentially run jack. So at least when you hit play or record in LMMS, you would actuate a bunch of other things. And this would be the master, and other items could be slaved to it using that simple output. So developers, even if you have no use for this, please take a moment, look at the coding that's going on there, and see if we can't generate a MIDI timecode output based on this clock right here that sends MIDI timecode out to the ALSA sequencer. If we can do that, I think we would blow the roof right off the building here, and you would open up an enormous amount of possibilities. And that's without changing anything about the graphic user interface. It would be without changing anything about file output and capabilities within the song editor. You wouldn't have to change anything about the way the program runs. We're just adding a socket output for MIDI data that is the timecode data rather than MIDI events. So that is my plea to you. I want to put this out here. If this would be relatively simple to do, just please do it. Okay, this would be amazing. This would really do a lot for us people that are composing the picture. We wouldn't have to go old school, or we wouldn't have to jump ship and go to some other sort of application. I'm very content with the MIDI capabilities of LMMS. I think they are far more straightforward and simple and quicker to use than something like the MIDI capability in Ardour, which is underdeveloped. Ardour was an audio program. It's better, I think, than Rose Garden. It's better than Q Tractor. It's incredibly stable and well thought out, and that is because LMMS is a MIDI sequencer. It's not an EDM maker. It's not a beat maker. It's a straight-up MIDI sequencer. All kinds of MIDI with any kind of sampled sound that you can put on it, and that means that it just doesn't have to make electronic music. We can make orchestral mock-ups too. We can do some pretty powerful stuff using LMMS just the way it is, without having to add any more capability. But if we had that MIDI timecode output, we could go 10 steps ahead, I think, in a lot of ways. For a lot of people, I think the possibilities would become relatively open there for not just this, but any kind of MIDI timecode aware software. So yeah, take a look at that, please. I would love to see this added in there as soon as possible. So please don't wait for a big release way in the future. Just if this is something that you thought, well, I never thought of doing that, but I think I could do it. I think we could get it done. Do it. Get it in there. Get it into the main branch and or into the trunk, and let's see if we can get it out on a release. So that's my plea. Good luck with that, and please put some comments into the GitHub request area if you think this can be done, and put some comments in there if you support this, because I think developers really respond to people petitioning their desires. So if you have a bunch of people asking for something, they're more likely to respond. But again, this is one of those things you may not even realize would have been great for people to use, even if you don't use it. So if this was an unknown to you, now you know. It's a known unknown. So let's see if we can make it happen. Thanks for your time and your consideration, and I wish the best of luck to all of you.